Hello everyone, welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 2nd of May 2024. So let's begin with the list of articles first. So the first article that we have today for detailed discussion is the wrong way to fight inequality. A very interesting discussion that has been done and wonderful article to read on your editorial page. Then another article that we have on the same page is related to Animal Protection Bill. Then the third article again on the editorial page related to a discussion on climate change and related to the discussion that we had done in the news analysis of 30th of April as well. And then analyzing labor on a warming planet. This is based on a new report that has been published by International Labour Organization. So we'll discuss that. Then from prelims perspective, we have these three articles today. ISRO finds proof of enhanced possibility of water ice in the polar craters of the moon. So we'll discuss what the study has found. Then something related to quarks and some of the other subatomic particles. And then one article related to plastic treaty. And then in the revisited headlines segment, we have two articles today. And these are continued discussion from some of the discussions that we have done in the past. So one related to Israel-Palestine issue, and then Election Commission bringing out a protocol on symbol loading units. So we'll discuss all these articles. So let's begin with the first article for today, and this is the wrong way to fight inequality. Now this is a very interesting article, and it starts with, and it talks about a recent study that was led by French economist Thomas Piketty. And this study has highlighted that economic inequality in India is very high. It shows that richest 1% of the people in India own 40.1% of the wealth and earn 22.6% of the income, while when it comes to the poorest half of the population, they own only 6.4% and they earn 15% of the income. Now this study, it compares the current inequality levels with those from the past, stating that the inequality today is worse than what it was during the British rule in India, during, or you can say between the First and the Second World Wars. Now, the inequality that has started to increase in India, it significantly started to increase since the 1980s. Which is around the time when India started to begin to open up its market for the world. And the share of income for the poorest half started to decrease, while the share of the richest 10%, it started to increase substantially after that. And in this segment, what we see is that economic growth in India was very slow before 1990. But when we did the economic reform back in 1991, it has improved significantly. The economic growth rather has significantly improved since then. Now, despite this growth, the increase in income hasn't been distributed equally. The study basically has pointed out that even though the poorest half, the income of the poorest half, it grew in absolute terms, the relative share of the national income has decreased. And this is where Piketty and the colleagues who have published the report, they have argued that because the tax system in India mainly taxes income rather than wealth, it ends up being unfair for the poorer sections. And that's why they have suggested that we should be taxing the wealth, particularly of those of the richest people, and this could be one of the ways to address this inequality. So this is basically what it says. So we know that the inequality has exceeded, and today we see that there is more inequality than the British time, and India's GDP growth has improved since 1991, and then after that we have seen that that's why they have suggested a wealth tax. They have suggested a wealth tax, and that's why they have talked about the fact that right now we tax the income, but rather we should tax the wealth. This is what the argument in the study has been put. But this is where you can say this article actually starts. This was the background of what we are about to discuss. Now, what we basically see is that the critics have argued that the total economy has grown significantly, which means that even those who are getting a smaller percentage, they are still better off than they were before when it comes to absolute terms. Understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that, let's say the total Indian economy was worth rupees 100 and now it is worth rupees 10,000. So in this, let's say if we are saying that the poorest 10%, they are just getting 10 rupees or they are just getting 10%. So getting 10% here would mean that they are getting rupees 10, correct? Right? And in this term, let's say if we are saying that, okay, fine, they were getting 10%, but now they are getting only 7%. But if they are getting 7%, then what it means is that they are actually getting how much? They are actually getting rupees 7,000. Sorry, 700. So that's why this is something that we have to understand, that although we are saying that their share in the wealth has decreased as a percentage term, but when we look at the absolute terms in which they are earning, they actually are earning more than they were earning. This is what the critics have argued. So that's why they have also pointed out that in a market economy, the differences in the income and wealth can occur because some people are better at investing and running businesses, and that also has to be understood. And also, a lot of, when we talk about the wealth distribution, a lot of wealth is not really personal wealth, but a lot of wealth also means that these are industries that have been set up. So for example, let's say there is a company X, and this company, they have set up an industry which is very huge, right? So then what happens is that the wealth is concentrated in this industry. Now, but this wealth is being counted with the owners of this company. So now you say that, okay, this company or the owners, they have a lot of wealth. So then this wealth needs to be taxed. But what has to be understood at the same time also is that because this company is big, it also gives opportunity to a lot of people. This is what is being argued here, that it gives opportunity to a lot of people, and this is where it also gives an opportunity to the poorest to earn that income. Because if it starts to shrink, if you start to tax and you start to shrink these industries, it will not only have effect on the wealthy, but it will also have an indirect impact on the poor as well, and perhaps it will have more impact on the poor than the wealthy. Because for the wealthy, it will only be the fact that, okay, if they were earning a lot, they are now earning a little less than what they were earning. So for them, it's not going to be a big problem. But for the people who are earning less, they might stop earning, or they might not even earn the basics. So that is why it will have an indirect impact on the poor as well. So that's why the overall economic growth has raised the incomes across all the levels despite unequal distribution. And in a free market, wealth disparity reflects differential investment success as well. So that's why these are things to be understood. Now, that's why the critics worry that a wealth tax could discourage the wealthy people from investing, which could slow down the economic growth and indirectly hurt the income of the workers. So that's why this is very, very crucial to understand, that it could discourage the investment, and that's why reducing the wages and harming the economic growth. Now, this is where the article also notes that some of the wealth inequality is also due to the rich getting special favors from the government, which protects them from competition. Removing these kind of protections could help make the economy more competitive and fair. And this perhaps is what we need, instead of looking towards a wealth tax, that give equal opportunities to everyone, so that the ones who are small, they have an opportunity to grow. So make a way in which there is a competitive segment growing up, and that leads to some kind of wealth distribution. Now, in this case, it is also mentioned that the wealth of the richest isn't just luxury, as I just told you. Items These are not just luxury items, but also assets like factories, which actually help in increasing the productivity and improving the living standards of everyone. And instead of imposing a wealth tax, the article that was suggests improving economic freedom and reducing the barriers that prevent people from lower income groups from advancing economically. And this would allow a fairer competition and potentially reduce the inequality in a more effective manner. So that's why the special privileges for the wealthy, this is what we need to stop and maybe give a level playing field to everyone so that others can also start growing. And at the same time, it also talks about increasing the economic freedom and competition. Now, in this, rather than looking at a wealth tax to improve the living standards and reduce inequality. Now, in this context, let me give you another example. We very often, you'll see that there have been a lot of discussions about the medical entrance examination, right? Medical entrance examination, which especially from the state of Tamil Nadu, this is something that was discussed in terms of NEET. Now, if I take this one step further, what we see is that if somebody wants to become a doctor, somebody wants to become a very highly qualified doctor. For that, if you look at the fees of medical colleges, a lot of medical colleges, they are extremely high, apart from the government colleges. So now in this case, for the poor, it becomes almost impossible to afford that fees, first of all. So they can't even think of going there. Secondly, even for the competition, many times it looks that it is very necessary to go through the entire coaching mechanism and then only get through. And that also perhaps is not affordable for a lot of people. So what happens is that there is a barrier. There is a barrier to entrance, because if you let them enter, then perhaps they would show you your skills and they might start growing. But there is a barrier to this entrance. So this barrier to entrance needs to be removed instead of looking at a wealth tax, because wealth tax is not going to be the answer, as has been advocated in this article as well. That instead of that, these kind of barriers to entry, the barriers to removing this inequality is something that perhaps India and the government of India needs to look upon. So it's a very interesting discussion altogether, and that's why it's not even required for me to go beyond the article and give you additional points, because it holistically has covered a lot of important points with regard to this discussion right now which is going on in the country. Coming to the next article on the editorial page itself, an animal protection bill that must be moved in June. Now, what exactly are we talking about? Here what we see is that countries globally, they are revising their animal cruelty laws to impose a harsher punishment. For instance, Croatia recently has amended its penal code to increase the penalties for animal cruelty and specifically targeting acts like the pet abandonment. Now, in these cases, when we look at these amendments, they intensify the consequences for inflicting pain, suffering, or death upon animals. Similarly, there was an incident in Mumbai where a community dog named Jai was killed, and this sparked a widespread advocacy for stricter animal cruelty laws. There were hashtags running justice for Jai. And this became very prominent on social media as well, alongside public demonstrations like prayer meets and vigils that started happening. Now, the primary legislation addressing animal cruelty in India, which is called as the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960, has been criticized for its inadequacies. The act has been seen to be ineffective as it is hampered by lenient penalties, or you can say bailable offenses, and non-cognizable status, which reflects that the police powers, which restricts the police powers without any kind of special judicial approval. Now, even the fines that we see, fines actually have not been revised, and they remain as low as rupees 10 even today. Moreover, the law also gives the courts a, you can say, a discretion to impose even a fine or imprisonment, often resulting in very minor penalties for very severe animal abuse cases. So that's why we have seen all these kind of cases, and the PCA Act also, you can say, in a manner lacks provision for community service, which could serve as a rehabilitative measure for the offenders. So that's why there are all these things. And given this, we saw that in November 2022, a draft amendment bill was proposed, and this had received very substantial public backing also. This bill, it aims to modernize the PCA Act by incorporating broader animal rights as well, and by enhancing the penalties and introducing new cognizable offences. However, it continues to allow the courts the choice between imprisonment and fines for serious offenders, which could be, you can say, which could lead to these perpetrators evading substantial punishment by opting to, let's say, pay a fine. So, but despite all these limitations, this draft bill, it represents very significant progress in Indian animal law. We see that a lot of advocates for revision of this PCA Act, they have been emphasizing on India's duty to lead by example in promoting non-violence. And that's why this upcoming change in government presents an opportunity, you can say, to also adopt these necessary reforms to the PC Act. So maybe when the first parliamentary session starts after the election, maybe the government can start looking towards this particular bill, which seems to be very, very crucial to put a stop on the kind of animal cruelty that we see in the country. Now coming to the next article, which is related to environment and ecology, and this is Sea Also Rises. Now here we know that India is currently experiencing intense heat waves, but the prospect of a generous monsoon season also has been forecasted by the Indian Meteorological Department, and it provides some kind of, you can say, psychological comfort to the people. But nevertheless, the study that has been led by Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology in Pune, along with the international collaborators, it paints a very grim long-term picture due to global carbon emission trends. And something that we discussed on 30th of April as well, that the study had found significant warming in the Indian oceans. If you remember, we discussed that Indian Ocean has been warmed by 1.2%, and it would increase by another 1.7 to 3.8 degrees Celsius by 2100. And this could affect both surface and deep waters up to 2000 meters. Now, this is where it was also talked about that ocean's heat content also could increase by 4.5 zetajoules per decade, and a figure which is expected to rise to between 16 and 22 zetajoules per decade. Now, this study also has highlighted the emerging threat of marine heat waves, which could also increase tenfold from the current almost 20 days a year to 200 to 250 days a year, potentially leading to a near constant heat wave state in the tropical Indian Ocean. Now, these are the things. So when it comes to these conditions are likely to accelerate further, and that's why these could lead to a lot of problems like coral bleaching, or it could adversely affect the fisheries and also contribute to some rapid formation of cyclones as well. The frequency of cyclones might also increase. And the impact of warming Indian Ocean, it extends to mainland India also, where the frequency of severe cyclones is going to increase and the monsoon patterns are becoming more erratic every year. And this is something that has been characterized by the prolonged droughts, which have been interrupted by very intense rainfall and flooding all over the country, in many parts of the country. And that's why these changes are attributed to global warming and has been driven by human activities like the burning of the fossil fuel, which pushes the planet towards a very critical tipping point. And given the slow response of the oceanic systems to change in conditions, the global efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions may not even be sufficiently able to address the kinds of changes that we need in the ocean state. Therefore, there is a very urgent need for India also to collaborate with some of the other Indian Ocean bordering countries to enhance that we have a proper data gathering and projections. And this kind of collaboration, it has to aim to improve the understanding of the local impacts and guide the development and the protection of infrastructure and also the people, and especially when it comes to data collection efforts in the Indian Ocean currently, which lags behind the regions, for example, like the Pacific or the Atlantic. So compared to that, we see that in the Indian Ocean, the data collection is not that robust, and the studies are not happening at a level which is happening in the Pacific areas. So that's why there are all these things that become very, very crucial from perspective of India to look forward to. Now, coming to the next article on page number 8, analyzing labor on a warming planet. Now, there is a report by International Labour Organization, and the name of the report is Ensuring Safety and Health at Work in a Changing Climate. Ensuring safety and health at work, safety and health at work in a changing climate. In a changing climate. Alright, so this is the report. Also remember the name of the report, because these kind of questions also very often come in your prelims examination as well. So this report that has been published, this highlights the urgent need for adapting the labor practices to mitigate climate related risks. So that's why we are here talking about climate proofing the labor practices to handle a changing climate which can impact the workers' safety and health. Now, what this report does is that it has identified that over a third of the global population, it faces very extreme heat every year, and this has resulted in approximately 23 million work related injuries. 23 million work related injuries. Alright, 23 million. Now, there are key climate impacts that have been pointed out. So for example, we have excessive heat, solar ultraviolet radiation, extreme weather events, workplace air pollution, vector-borne diseases, and exposure to agrochemicals. So these are the things which are particularly affecting the construction workers, the agricultural workers, and some of the city conservancy staff as well, and in case of even transport and tourism. So we see that there are all these which are affected. So agriculture and construction worker, city conservancy staff, workers in transport and tourism sector, and the gig economy workers. So that's why in all these cases, so even that's why transport and tourism. So workers in all these sectors, we see that they are facing the problem, and additionally the gig economy, representing a very growing fraction of the workforce, is noted for its vulnerability to heat also. Now in India, agricultural sector, which employs mostly informal workers with very minimum protective measures, is highly susceptible here. So that's why in case of agriculture, this is going to be a big challenge, because largely we are looking at informal labor here, and they do not have the kind of protective measures that are required. Similarly, when we look at the MSME sector, which employs 21% of India's workforce, 21% of India's workforce, and the construction, where construction sector housing, which houses almost 12% of the workers, they are also facing significant risk due to informal working conditions and the urban heat effects that we are witnessing right now. Now that's why this report, it touches upon the need to update the regulations to try and address the current and the future hazards, such as the current laws, they do not adequately cover all the worker categories or the newer industries that are growing up. And legal frameworks in India, like the Factories Act and the recent Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code of 2020, they try to aim and consolidate and update the safety standards, although their enforcement is still a very inconsistent thing in India. So that's why we see that there are these laws, but the problem has been the enforcement of the new and the existing rules. And existing rules on the workforce, on workplace temperature and the kind of ventilation etc that are required, they are outdated, and they lack the specifics that are required for the different levels of physical activity, and that's why they fail to incorporate the modern cooling technologies that are required. And that's where the report discusses a broader climate hazard, like effluent handling and the rise of problems like silicosis from increasing of the mining activities. So that's why it emphasizes on the need for updated safety technologies and better regulatory enforcements as well. So that's why there are cases that have been discussed here. So that's why increased risk of silicosis due to unsafe mining practices or the environmental contamination. For example, the case of Hindustan Unilever, where mercury contamination incident happened, and in case of silicosis crisis that we had seen in Gujarat. So these are the things that highlight the ongoing challenges in incorporating the accountability and the government on site that is required. And that's why when we talk about this report altogether, it talks about, it calls for a comprehensive update to regulatory frameworks for a better protective, or to better protect the workers from the evolving challenges of climate change. And that's why it has been advocating for both improved workforce safety and also at the same time an enhanced response to the environmental hazards. So that's why we see that right now we have uh, insufficient enforcement of safety standards and lack of modern safety technologies in mining and other risk industries. So that's why it talks about the updating of the regulatory workforce and enhancing the enforcement and accountability measures to ensure we have a safer working condition for the labor workforce. So that's why there are a lot of points that have been discussed, and these are very fruitful points, very important points from examination perspective. Now coming to the articles for your prelims examination, the very first article that we have is on page number 5. ISRO finds proof of enhanced possibility of water ice in polar craters of the moon. Now this is something that we know we have been looking for, and there was a detailed study that was conducted by the Indian space scientists from ISRO's Space Applications Center, and this was done in partnership with researchers from IIT Kanpur and also University of Southern California and Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA as well, and at the same time ISM Dhanbad also was involved. So all these, so Space Applications Center, IIT Kanpur, ISM Dhanbad, Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA, all these were involved, and at the same time University of Southern California as well. So all these were involved in this particular study. Now it has provided very significant insight into the potential water ice presence in the lunar poles, specifically within the polar craters. Now the researchers, they have discovered that the levels of subsurface ice within the first couple of meters beneath the moon's surface are approximately 5 to 8 times greater than the surface ice at both the poles. And that's why this finding is particularly important for the future lunar missions and the long-term human habitation plans that we have, and accessing these subsurface ice, or these reserves that we have, maybe it can be done by drilling, and this is something that can be crucial. And additionally, this study has also observed that the water ice distribution in the northern pole is notably higher, being almost maybe twice as much as the southern pole. And that's why this uneven distribution is also attributed to the geological activities in the past of the moon, particularly during certain periods, which is called as the Imbrian period, which was a time where significant volcanic activities happened on the moon. So that is what we basically have seen, that significantly more subsurface ice compared to the surface ice, and northern pole has twice the amount of water ice as southern pole. And this basically, when we talk about this, it comes from the Imbrian period of the lunar history, so where a lot of volcanic outgassing would have happened on the moon. Now, the primary source for the subsurface water ice is believed to be the volcanic outgassing itself. So, that is what would have led to this water ice being present there. At the same time, the study also has highlighted the influence of mare or the basaltic plains, the mare volcanism that we call, and the provincial impact of the cratering on the spatial distribution of the water ice. So, so what it says is that the distribution of ice is influenced by mare volcanism. So where we and the impact cratering that has happened on the moon. So that's why the detailed understanding of where and how deep the water ice is located is very vital for also selecting the appropriate landing sites for the future missions. And this is something that is aimed at exploring and analyzing the lunar volatilities as well. So that's why this research is not only fundamental in advancing our knowledge of the lunar geology, but it's very, very essential for ISRO's upcoming projects as well, which is focused on in situ volatile exploration on the moon. At the same time, if you remember the discussion that we did on the 30th of April, we also discussed about the Chang'e 6 mission of China, where they have selected certain areas where they want to establish their base on the moon, and that those bases are also very near the south pole of the moon, because that is where water ice is present. So that's why all these, you can say in a manner, are connected points. Now coming to the next article, particles called quarks hold the key to the final fate of some stars. Now, when it comes to this article basically provides an extensive discussion on the nature of quarks and their significance in understanding the matter and cosmic phenomena. Now, what are quarks? Quarks, we know these are fundamental components of of matter, and they form protons and neutrons. We did this discussion earlier also, and all this would happen through combinations which are called as hadrons. Now, just again, let me just talk about this again. So when it comes to quarks, quarks would lead to the formation of hadrons and leptons. Hadrons and leptons. Alright. Now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to the quarks, these quarks, they cannot exist independently. So that's why they exist in groups such as baryons and mesons. Just understand this, baryons and mesons. So these hadrons, there are two types of hadrons. We have baryons and mesons. Now baryons are the ones that you know of, alright? Baryons are the ones which you know of, and these basically, they are formed of three quark groups together. So made of, or rather say, let's say combination of three quarks. Whereas in case of mesons, these are combination of two quarks. Alright, combination of two quarks. So in this case, what happens is that combination of two quarks basically means a quark and an anti-quark. Alright, they are formed from a quark and an anti-quark. Now, recent research, it has highlighted that three quark systems, they are more likely to form as compared to two quark clumps in the environments which are dense with certain particles. And this has challenged the traditional particle physics models that we have until now. Now, the studies, they basically have explored the heavy quark clumps, which basically are less stable than those which are made of the lighter quarks, which are found in the protons and the neutrons. And these studies, that's why they require very sophisticated technology due to the short-lived nature of the heavy quark clumps, but they are very crucial to complete understanding of the quark dynamics and the role that they play in the phenomena such as nuclear fusion or the life cycle of a star. Now that's why when we look at a star, where we have gravity and the nuclear forces which are in equilibrium until the star starts to exhaust all its fusion material, and this is something that potentially leads to the collapse of the star and leads to the formation of things like black holes or neutron stars, or even something which is hypothesized to be a quark star. Now understand all this. So baryons we discussed. So baryons is what you know of. Baryons basically, they make up the protons and neutrons. They make up the protons and neutrons. So these are the known familiar particles, correct? So now in this particular scenario, what we know is that in a star, all right, in a star, there is an equilibrium between gravity and the nuclear forces, all right, the nuclear forces, and especially nuclear fusion. So there is an equilibrium between the two, but when the star starts to die, when the star is near the end of its life cycle, this is where we see that they start exhausting whatever they have. Alright, so the fusion that is happening, you know that for any star, even including our own sun, all the heat and light that you are getting from the sun is mainly because of the fusion, nuclear fusion that is happening at the center of this star. But as they are approaching their death, this is where fusion material that is leading to all the fusion, that starts to decrease. So now that equilibrium that we had between gravity and the nuclear forces, now this equilibrium is not maintained anymore, and the star starts to collapse. The star starts to collapse. So when it's collapsed, you know, especially when it comes to the bigger stars, the massive stars, first an explosion will happen at the center of the star called as supernova, and this supernova could either lead to the formation of a black hole or formation of a neutron star. Either a black hole will be formed or a neutron star will be formed. Now here we have another concept called as a quark star. We have this concept called as a quark star. Now quark star, which might form under very specific mass conditions, they would consist of quark matter, a state where neutrons are broken down into quarks. So what we are saying is that we know that when it comes to, let's say, formation of neutrons or formation of protons, they are being formed from combination of quarks, combination of three quarks together, correct? Now what happens is that here in the quark star, what may happen is that we are talking about a state where neutrons are broken down into quarks. So neutrons break down into quarks. Now, some of the research has suggested that the core of massive neutron stars may predominantly consist of quark matter. And these findings, these are based on advanced theoretical models and the limited astrophysical observations, which has indicated a need for further data to confirm these theories. Now, the quarks basically are held together by something called as gluons. All right, gluons. Now, uh, so quarks basically are held together by something called as gluons. Now, gluons, as the name suggests, this is like a glue, like a fevistick or a fevicol, which keeps all the quarks to stick together. All right. So that's why this is very crucial part of matter, because it ensures that all the quark particles, they stick to one another. That's why gluons are just like a fevicol or a fevistick. Now, what it suggests is that under extreme conditions, such as those created in the particle accelerators, quarks can exist in a deconfined state, which is known as a quark-gluon plasma. And this state, it resembles conditions which are thought to exist shortly after the Big Bang. What is Big Bang? Big Bang is where this universe started from. That when it comes to the birth of the universe, at the birth of the universe, the entire universe would have been a very small particle, smaller than a proton, and then it started to expand. So just as it started to expand, there would have been a state called as the quark gluon plasma state. So this would have existed just after the Big Bang. Alright, just after the Big Bang. So overall, the study of quarks not only deepens our understanding of the atomic composition and the fundamental forces of nature, but also it continues to challenge and refine our knowledge as well of the universe's most extreme conditions and about the celestial bodies as well. So that's why understand the value of quarks. And quarks, just remember that these are fundamental particles, and these fundamental particles lead to the formation of all the other particles that we know of, all the other particles that exist in this world. So if it was confusing at all, or if it was a bit more technical, please go back, just go through the entire discussion that I did with you once more, so that it clears out your doubts. And if you have further doubts, ask it in the comments and I would reply to those comments. Now, coming to the revisited articles, or sorry, I missed one article here. So there was another article, and let me discuss that with you. Just 1 minute. So there is another article, and this is there on your science page today, and this is about the plastic treaty talks that just concluded in Ottawa. Now, the plastic treaty pact that concluded in Ottawa, we see that the experts, they are not very happy with it. Right? They are not very happy because this is called as the Global Plastic Treaty. All right. So the global plastic treaty. So the Global Plastic Treaty negotiations that happened in Ottawa, it just concluded recently. Now it has been marked by a lot of disappointment according to a lot of activists and environmental groups. And despite nearly a week of discussions involving representatives from nearly 192 countries, the talks, part of, you can say, fourth round, which started since 2022, where we are looking at a commitment to eliminate plastic pollution. It fell short of expectations altogether. And these discussions are overseen by the International Negotiation Committee, which was established to create a legally binding framework which was aimed at ending plastic pollution. Now, central challenge that we have seen in these negotiations is the deep entanglement of plastic production with major oil economies and the vast manufacturing sector that produce and supply various grades of plastic. Now, plastics, when it comes to it, plastics are required in various applications, right? And the alternatives that are there, they have to be both affordable and effective. So the problem is that when it comes to the alternatives of plastic, this is where the problem starts. The alternatives of plastic, they have to be affordable, right? They have to be affordable and effective. But unfortunately, that has not happened. And that's why when we look at the plastics, the environmental impact of plastics is severe. And we know that they do not degrade organically. They significantly pollute the marine and the terrestrial ecosystems. So we know about all this. And during the talks, criticism started arising over the committee's failure to even address the core issues of unsustainable plastic production. So that's why we have seen that it has been also pointed out that there is a fundamental question about managing plastic production, and that is something which is remaining unaddressed altogether. The anticipated outcome of the talks, something maybe where a detailed plan to create primary plastic production was not even achieved. The Although when it comes to discussions, the discussions did release in an agreement to enhance the assessments of various different factors related to plastics. So, for example, emission, production design, or waste management, financing. So, all these things were discussed. But despite the perceived lack of substantial progress, we see that in a lot of ways it has been highlighted that the meeting achieved its goal of advancing the treaty's text and preparing for a more effective intersessional work in the upcoming months. So that's why this work also involves expert meeting between all the countries and various different organizations, and they have been aimed at forecasting an agreement on critical issues before the next and potentially the final meeting that is scheduled for November 2024, and this time in Busan in South Korea. So, additionally, that's why we see that there were divergent national perspectives. For example, when we talk about India, India opposed the restriction of the production of primary plastic polymers. For example, what we call as virgin plastic. So what we saw was that India had opposition to the restriction in the production of the virgin plastic, and India argued that such production cuts were beyond the scope of existing resolutions by the United Nations Environmental Assembly. Although India also acknowledged the need to regulate certain chemicals which are used in plastic production. So that's why these discussions, they reflect the ongoing global challenges on balancing of the economic interests with the very urgent economic concerns that we have, environmental concerns that we have in tackling of the plastic pollution. So that's where these are the things that we have to see. But unfortunately, this is the state of when it comes to any environmental negotiation, that already 4 rounds have happened, and the 5th round of this tourism activity will happen in South Korea. So it also shows many a times that there is a lot of for lack of a better word, show off of what we are doing instead of actually doing the work that is required. Now coming to the revisited articles, the first article that we have is on page number 14. In Israel, Blinken asks Hamas to accept very strong deal. Now the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he urged Hamas to accept the robust ceasefire proposal that involves exchanging hostages, emphasizing the urgency of reuniting the families with their loved ones. And his advocacy for the ceasefire, it came when he went for a visit to Tel Aviv, where he received a very warm welcome from Israel, who are supportive of the US's stance on Israel's conflict with Hamas. Now, during this meeting, both there were public and private meetings. Blinken expressed a deep commitment to securing the release of the hostages that have been taken by the militants on October 7 by Hamas, and describing this goal as central to the US's effort. Additionally, we see that there are internal and external challenges, particularly the kinds of criticisms that we have seen of Israel Prime Minister and from the coalition government, who have opposed all the negotiations. And despite this, Israel's opposition leader has also voiced support for moving forward with the hostage release deal, pledging to also help secure the government approval if it is required. And that's why what we see is that Blinken also reiterated the US's opposition to Israeli military offense that we have seen in Rafah, where many Palestinians have sought refuge. And his discussion with Israeli leaders, it underscores the US's determination to secure a ceasefire which would facilitate the safe return of all the hostages, and trying to push for an immediate action on this front. But we have to go and see further what happens and what not, because we know how strong a bond US and Israel they have been always maintaining. So in that, how much of a neutral stance can US have in ensuring that there is an actual ceasefire and all the hostilities that we have seen from the side of Israel, that also stops. But we have to see further developments. If at all something like this goes, we can only hope for that happening. Next is EC brings out protocol on symbol loading units as mandated by top court. Now, the Election Commission of India has issued a detailed protocol for the handling and storage of the symbol loading units, following a directive that had come from the Supreme Court on 26th of April. Now, the Supreme Court's order, it mandates that after the election results are declared, the symbol loading units, they must be sealed and stored in containers alongside the EVMs in a secure strong room for at least 45 days. And these SLUs, they are very crucial for elections, as they load the names and the symbols of the candidates on the VVPAT machines also. And previously, these SLUs, they were distributed to the local election officers by engineers from Bharat Electronics Limited or the Election Commission just before the voting process, and they were returned to the engineers a day after the poll. And this process, it involved the engineers from public sector undertakings that manufacture the EVMs and the VVPATs along with the SLUs. Now, in response to these new requirements, the Election Commission has instructed all the state chief election officers to establish a necessary infrastructure for safe SLU handling and the storage. And following a new protocol now, which will be effective from the 1st of May. The Election Commission has also stated that each assembly constituency would be provided with 2 to 4 SLUs, SLU containers, which are based on their specific requirements. And at the same time, the Supreme Court's ruling also facilitates the verification of the microcontrollers within the EVMs, trying to ensure electoral transparency and security. And we had done this discussion on 27th of April. Now, the updated protocols, that's why they will apply to all the symbol loading activities in the VVPATs also that occur on or after the 1st of May. Now, lastly, coming to the mains questions of the day. The first question, according to recent findings by Thomas Piketty, economic inequality in India has reached unprecedented levels, surpassing even those during the British colonial period. Evaluate the causes of rising economic inequality since the liberalization of Indian economy in the 1980s. So you have to talk about what has caused to the rising economic inequality and what kind of inequality are we talking about. But a way forward is very, very important. See, in these kind of questions, it is very easy for us to only talk about all the problems that we see and all the data points with regard to those problems. But at the same time, we have to talk about the solution. And that's why these are the solutions, some of the solutions that were presented in this article. You have to write about that also, even though specifically it has not been mentioned in the question that you have to give the solution. But whenever you write answers to these kind of questions, always ensure that there is a way forward and you are ending the answer on a positive note. Now, Second question. Climate change is increasingly affecting occupational safety and health, necessitating adjustment in labor regulations and practices. Discuss the impacts of climate change on the workforce. Also evaluate the adequacy of India's existing legal frameworks in addressing these challenges and suggest measures for improvement. So again, something based on the ILO report, we discussed extensively the various different points. So the same points, they have to be brought down according to the requirements of this question. Right. So this brings us to the end of today's discussion. I hope that this discussion is going to be helpful for you in the examination. Please do subscribe to our channel, and we will be back with our analysis tomorrow. Thank you very much for being here.